Hey, WTF friends, let me ask you something. When was the last time you looked in the mirror and truly accepted the person staring back at you? I mean, radical, no holds barred self-acceptance. It's not always easy, right? Well, today's episode is going to change you in the best way possible. Welcome to Unscripted Pivots. I am your host, Danielle Sprouls, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome today Dr. Laura Gallaher to the show. Dr. Laura is not only a national best-selling author, but a powerhouse in the world of organizational psychology and transformation. And while some PhDs might be, stay tucked away in the world of academia, Dr. Laura is out here shaking things up. She's been hired by NASA to transform their organizational culture after the Columbia accident. She's led groundbreaking performance management changes at Disney, and she's even inspired the global teams at Yahoo to ignite change from within. Oh, and did I mention she brings all of this with a sense of humor? Today we're diving into something we could all use a bit more of: radical self-acceptance. Trust me, you don't want to miss this conversation. So buckle up and get ready to take some notes, because Dr. Laura is about to share some incredible insights on how embracing who you are can lead to achieving more than you ever thought possible. Welcome to Unscripted Pivots, Dr. Laura.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm so happy to be here.
So, listeners, I met Dr. Laura just briefly online. I think it was yesterday. And I looked at her website, all the things, and I will tell you, we could talk about just like so many, many topics. She's an expert in them all. And I invited her to kind of contribute as to what she wanted to focus on. And she said radical self-acceptance. And I'm like, hell to the yeah. I was like, this is a good topic. You're an expert on it, and we all need to learn more. So that will be the focus today. But in the show notes, you will see all the things to follow her and find her. And I encourage each and every one of you to check her out, because she goes way beyond this conversation. But this is a good one. So Dr. Laura, what exactly is radical self-acceptance, and why do you believe it's so key in transforming our lives?
Radical self-acceptance is being fully and completely okay with who you are right now without changing a thing. That's the simplest way that I can describe what it is. I'm okay with myself. That means I'm okay with my flaws and imperfections. It means I'm also at peace with my strengths and my talents. And this is going to sound like hyperbole, probably, but radical self-acceptance genuinely is the key to making literally everything in your life easier. Absolutely everything. Have you ever heard?
I hear you. Go ahead.
Have you ever heard that suffering equals pain times resistance?
Not put that way, but the message within that statement, yes. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So pain is inevitable throughout life. I think that most people can recognize that. Although if I was talking to myself from 20 years ago, I probably would have thought like, no, there's a way I can design my life so that there's no pain. Like I would have had this really hardcore perfectionist mentality that like, that's not true. These Buddhists don't know anything from thousands and thousands of years. Like I was adamant that I could somehow design the perfect life. Very dangerous way to think, by the way. But
she's tried, she's failed, and she's learned, and she's here to teach us how there is a better way to go. But
there is.
Well, when I hear about pain, there's so many things about pain. Today, it's not that I welcome pain into my life, Dr. Laura. It's that I accept the importance of it and the value when it's transformed properly. But to your point that you were, I think, about to make, because it was in the message of what you just said, is that, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yes, that's
therein
exactly
lies
right.
The difference. Yeah.
And I like to actually say that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice.
Yeah.
And like that can really kind of hit deep sometimes for people. I know that I had a fairly defensive reaction to that the first time I heard it, because it didn't feel like something that I had any choice or control with. It felt like something that was just happening to me. Can I share a story with you that really
please do. We love a story.
Me see? So, as you mentioned, I had worked for NASA, and so I worked out at Kennedy Space Center, which is here in Florida. And there's a good bit of the drive from where I was living in Orlando to Kennedy Space Center, where there's no real traffic reports. Because at that point, it's just the causeway. And so you're just at that point, you're almost on center, but not quite. They don't report like there's been an accident, there's a backup. And so this one morning, I'm driving in and traffic comes to an absolute standstill. And I am a good mile or more away from the Space Center still. This was very unusual. I had not experienced this before. And I had planned my morning fine. I would have been on time if not for all of this traffic, right? And we were just completely stuck. And so I had a very frustrated reaction immediately, like resistance. I think traffic is a very relatable place, right, for most people and listeners to feel that resistance, like
especially in California where I am. Yeah. In New York where I came from. Yeah, I know traffic.
Oh my gosh, in New York. Yeah, right. So much resistance comes up for us in traffic. So I had immediate resistance to what was happening, which is really silly because that resistance doesn't help. It doesn't do anything. But I had no information. I didn't know what was going on. There was no radio report to listen to. This was also like 20 years ago. So, even smartphones weren't what they are today. I could not get any information. And I started to worry about things that in hindsight seemed so irrational. Like, I'm going to be late to my meeting. It's like, well, so is probably almost everybody else, right? Like, I'm not alone in this, traffic mess. And I just was getting more and more angsty and frustrated. Like, my blood pressure was just, like, heart was pounding. I was getting so angry. Eventually, traffic finally did clear up and I made it. And my mental and emotional state by the time I got into work was just, I was so frazzled. Like, it totally messed up my whole day. And I share that story because I can reflect back on it and realize that I created so much suffering for myself in that experience. The pain is simply, I'm stuck. There's nowhere to go because there really isn't even a way to turn around in that place. Like, I really was.
No, I've been there. Yeah.
If I'm going to be safe, right? Like, there's nowhere for me to take my car. I am stuck. So that was the pain, and knowing that it was changing my whole plan. But it was my resistance that caused the suffering. Because if I had simply accepted in that moment, like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but clearly there is nowhere for us to go in this moment. I could have put the car in park. I could have rolled down the windows. I could have put the seat back. I could have put my feet up, right? I could have turned on some music. I could have actually gotten out of the car. I could have taken off my shoes and grounded in the grass that was next to the road. There were almost infinite choices that I had I simply accepted what was going on. But I was so stuck in my own misery and suffering that I was just resisting. And the part about the story that I think felt the most profound for me was when I actually did learn what happened. There was a fatal accident.
Yeah.
I am there losing my mind and someone else is losing their life.
It's, very, very good point. Very good point. I will tell you, there's a couple things in this story that come to me, Dr. Laura. First of all, being from New Jersey, working in Manhattan for, 25 years, I was around. I wasn't in New York when the day of 9/11, but I will tell you, ever since that moment, whenever I am redirected or, in traffic, stuck in traffic or things that happen, I take a moment and say, things are the way they should be. I don't know what it is that I'm avoiding, but, that helps me get into acceptance, right? And dispel the resistance. And it's really about practicing the power of the pause and take a minute and say, I have a choice here. I'm either going to react or I'm going to respond. And those two things can be very, very different from one another. But fatal accident. And as a mama of four, I always think of somebody probably lost their life and I can just dial it down for a minute, So the anxiety that I used to have really doesn't exist for me today because of the things that you teach and that you practice. I also have as a way of life today, which is very, very liberating, that I can tell you. Yes. But let's be honest, Dr. Laura. Accepting things, self-acceptance, radical self-acceptance, seeing it just so powerfully in black and white. it's a choice, but it really is a lifestyle, right? So there must be some
Yeah.
baby steps that you coach your clients to begin to make that transformation, because this can be a light bulb moment, which it is, but it's not a switch that comes with it like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Let me do that now, right? There's probably a process, a journey, if you will, a daily choice to getting there. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. And I had a big almost laugh reaction at journey because I do have this tattoo right here on my wrist that says journey.
It does.
And no, not the band, but because
the band was good though back in the day before I think it was Steve Perry left. But okay, so you guys will see this on YouTube. I encourage you to watch this video and not just listen. Dr. Laura is showing a tattoo. When did you get that? And tell us a little bit about that, but also answer the other question. This is an organic unfolding of our insights. Good.
Just trust the process.
Yeah, so, trust the process.
I got this tattoo in March of 2019.
Okay.
And I had just come back from a year of working and traveling internationally. So I lived in 11 countries over 12 months while I was still running my business.
Wow.
And this was before COVID, which the good news is I was actually able to travel. The hard news was most of my clients were like, I don't know about the virtual thing. Let us know when you're back in person. And so it was actually a really, really, really difficult year for me, even though it was cool. There was a lot about it that was amazing and fun. But at the end of the year, I realized that my key takeaway from that whole experience was surrender.
Okay.
And that had been a focus of mine for years, and I still wasn't there. And I realized this is a journey. Like, this is not, it's like you said before, Danielle, it's not flipping a switch.
Yeah.
Like, I've done it. It is a practice, is another key word that I like to say. It is a practice. How can I continuously practice radical self-acceptance? So that's some of the origin story for the journey tattoo. As far as how to practice it, I do want to give your listeners a really tangible, tactical thing they can do. And before that, I want to explain one of the key reasons people are actually resistant to self-acceptance. Most people, when I talk about radical self-acceptance, think, well, if I accept myself, then what? I'm just complacent. I just stop getting any better. And I think that's the most important myth about self-acceptance to dispel.
Okay.
Because the opposite of self-acceptance isn't self-improvement. The opposite of self-acceptance is self-judgment. So I can focus on self-improvement from the lens of self-judgment, which is what most of my high-achieving clients tend to do. Or I can focus on self-improvement from the lens of self-acceptance. And so that, we call that this paradox theory that says that self-acceptance and self-improvement coexist. When you can wrap your mind around that, it starts to really shift the paradigm, and it changes the worldview to say, oh, so self-acceptance doesn't mean just kind of giving up and stopping my growth.
I love how you're saying that, Dr. Laura, because what it's bringing to my mind is that the shift becomes focusing on the problem to focusing on the solution, right? So when we dispel the self-judgment, it doesn't mean we're giving up the self-improvement, proactive journey that we're on to get better or do whatever, especially for the high achievers. But, where we're going, not necessarily where we are, while also staying present. But I love it because the self-judgment, it is so easy to begin from a critical state of mind, which, that gets us nowhere. I want to just bring up a quote. I was looking at your Instagram and something really I just loved it. Let me say it. So the quote goes, I found myself in this constant pursuit of happiness rather than finding happiness in the pursuit. That's a quote from Dr. Laura. And I said, okay, that's going on my fridge. Because within that, it also speaks to the positivity around your message. Because when you just hear radical self-acceptance, first of all, when I hear the word radical, I'm like, okay, this means extreme. This is going to be hard. This is just like there's no nuance to it. And yet there is. There's so much depth behind that actual, journey that there is with the radical self-acceptance. But I love about the whole happiness in the pursuit.
In the pursuit,
right?
yes. And I would love to take full credit for that quote. I did not, I'm not the origin for it. I can't remember the exact place that I learned it. I know Dr. Benjamin Hardy writes about it in his books. He's also an organizational psychologist, but I think it actually comes back to somebody more from history. But it is profound.
At the end of the day, I mean, I credit you with bringing it to my awareness. And here's the thing, right? We're all walking versions of something earlier that we were taught, right?
Yeah.
And we are gifted the opportunity to share that information, that insight, that perspective. And so I'm crediting it with you because this is where I found it. So thank you for saying somebody else may have written it, maybe in a different way, but the message is for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Laura, the message is for everybody.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about, when we think about radical self-acceptance, the word self in and of itself is like a personal journey, it sounds like, right? But you also assist organizations. I mean, Yahoo, Disney, we're talking NASA people. I mean, she's been there, done that. How does the radical self-acceptance in those larger platforms work? Can you give it a comparison or? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably actually go back to NASA, really is where I started my career. And it's where I learned about how profound this kind of work can be. So I was studying organizational psychology already. I thought this is already super important. We spend far too much of our lives, at work, going to work, to not have it be a productive and fruitful and enjoyable place. And then when the Columbia accident happened in 2003, and I was given the opportunity to come in and help transform their culture, I learned a lot about what the investigation revealed. And what it comes down to is obviously much more complex than what I can talk about just in our time today. But as a psychologist, I was blown away by the reality that some of the smartest people in the world, rocket scientists, Nobel Prize winners, were in a system that reinforced beliefs combined with self-deception that led them to make decisions that killed 7 people. So it wasn't a question of intelligence. It was a question both of the system factors and then the intrapersonal factors. I would imagine all of your listeners can identify with a moment or maybe multiple moments at work when they had a thought of, I could speak up right now. I could express disagreement right now with my boss, or I could share that I think that something's maybe going to go off of the rails, but I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to upset somebody. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. Right? So they didn't feel the psychological safety in that moment to speak up. That is one piece of what was happening inside NASA's culture. And so radical self-acceptance ties into that, because if I am radically self-accepting, I am not going to allow a fear of upsetting somebody or even my career being set back. I'm not going to let that stop me from doing what I genuinely think is the most effective thing to do. I put myself and my ego down here, and I put what I think is right up here. And I'm making it sound very sort of crystal clear and like easy and obvious. And most people listen and go, well, yeah, of course. But self-deception is the challenge. If I am thinking it's not going to make a difference, I'm just going to rationalize and talk my way out of speaking up.
Sure. And so, it brings up things about fear, right? And so there's all these, around speaking up. And whenever we're really denying ourselves, especially when we're going to make an informed decision and statement that would be seriously contributing to a situation, you have to get outside that sense of fear. And for me, as the younger version of me played small, stayed small. And to your story, though, that could be catastrophic, right? So, but even for the, everyday lives and whatnot, we're really denying ourselves and the people around us some decision making that can be happening as a group that's really for the benefit of the whole, right? And it's not that you're just promoting yourself and your ego. But it also brings up to my mind, seeking external validation, the obsession with that. And you really can't get to radical self-acceptance if you're caught up in that people-pleasing mode that is so easy to us. So that, even culturally was introduced as something that was positive, right? And so because you weren't self-seeking in that moment. And at the end of the day, there's a big shift that's happening in the world. That's why I love what you're studying, what you're doing, the messages you're delivering in your work. They're so critical because they really kind of upend some of the beliefs that we were taught.
Yes.
Right. And it's time. Yeah. It's time to have that growth mindset. There's the buzzword, right? And then we talk about intelligence, and then we talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, right? That's really been introduced, over the last several years into organizations. And I think the term's almost overused, but the shift is no less important. So what kind of things are you seeing, both on the personal side with the coaching or even on the larger scale clients that you help in organizations? I mean, do you see that there's this readiness to make these shifts?
I really do. And I will acknowledge that I get to work with a segment of the global population that is pretty cool. Sometimes when I talk about what I do, people say, gosh, that must be hard to get companies to hire you to come in and do that kind of thing. And I'm like, is it? I don't know. I'm pretty busy because, the people that would have no interest in hiring an organizational psychologist, I don't even talk to them. They just don't end up on my radar nor me on their radar. So I get to work with leaders who already understand or have core beliefs that align with mine, like how people feel about themselves and the organization matters. Creating a truly effective culture actually drives business results. And so when I'm working with leaders like this, I absolutely feel the readiness as soon as I start to talk about some of these ideas, and I help each high achieving person shine a light on what does it look like in areas of my life where I have a self-acceptance gap. Those are the key areas of their lives that they're really wanting to change and shift. And what's so empowering about radical self-acceptance as a practice is that it is wildly empowering. It brings everything back. Instead of me feeling like a victim or me turning into a critic and blaming other people when I don't like how I feel about something, it helps me see that I actually have infinite choices for how I handle any situation. And that the more I can practice that radical self-acceptance, the more I'm going to actually listen to my own intuition and trust it and allow it to guide me, speak up without fear of external validation. And everything becomes easier.
What's in my mind right now is that, before acceptance, to your point about the organizations that you're working with that get it, that align with your thinking, what they're starting with is a state of awareness, because you have to have awareness before you can even address acceptance. And so tell me a little bit about, and I talk about, in fact, I'm in the middle of writing this book. I wrote the book. Now we're editing the book.
Exciting.
I'm editing it before it actually goes out there. And I literally was at 5:30 this morning working on one of my chapters. And, it was about the 3 A's. And we talk about awareness, acceptance, and then action, right? So there's the process. So it's so funny that you and I just happen to be talking about this today, because that's what I'm working on in my chapter. And I'm a big believer in that process.
Yeah.
How do you help for those that are not already aware, but seeking help? Because what they do know is something's wrong, but they have no awareness of like what it is and what not. Walk us a little bit through the process of your coaching style where you're helping them become aware, dial in, and get into the acceptance so that they can then transform into the action.
We look at 5 different sources of self-awareness in the work that we do. And I say we because I run a small boutique consultancy, right? It's not just me. We love to actually facilitate in pairs. And so these different sources of awareness, when a leader or a person goes through these different sources of self-awareness, they usually get some degree of conflicting information about themselves. Their own self-perception, for example, maybe doesn't match the feedback that they get from their peer group. Or maybe it matches for 2 or 3 of them, but then for another 2 or 3, it's different. But that doesn't match what comes up through the imagery that we walk them through when we tie the imagery back to core elements of self. And so we like to, again, kind of shine that light in multiple directions, multiple angles, so they can start to notice, there's something here doesn't quite align. In what way might I be self-deceived? And then we talk about self-acceptance is actually being a ceiling for self-awareness.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say, well, Danielle, do you find, are you like me? Do you have a strong inner critic voice? Or have you historically had a strong inner critic voice?
Historically, on occasion, I now have kind of silenced, well, we'll call her Sally. I say, Sally, sit down, okay? It comes in. I'm human. And then I say,
Yes.
Sally, sit down, okay?
No
I
room
love
for you
today, okay? There you go.
Yeah. So if you think about, and go back 15 years or 20 before you had built this kind of relationship with Sally where you could just say, sit down, Sally.
Yeah.
Think about how Sally would speak to you if you made a mistake or came up short in some way. Now imagine that you have somebody working with you or working for you, and they come to you and you speak to them the way that Sally spoke to you. Ooh, right? Just kind of picture that interaction for a moment. It's probably rough. And now ask yourself, is that person more likely or less likely to come to you again if they make a mistake or come up short? Most people say, yeah, less likely. They're going to go, that was unpleasant. I don't want to be vulnerable like that again. I don't want to feel belittled or demeaned, or I don't want to feel guilt or shame, right? Like any of those feelings. And so that's what's happening in our own minds. When we are leaning into self-judgment, which would be like a Sally or an inner critic tendency, then our inner mind actually starts hiding things from ourselves. And this is tough for most high achievers to really grok, because they're like, no, like my inner critic points out all kinds of things. I'm very aware of all of my shortcomings. But the reality is you're only allowing yourself to see and know the things that your self-acceptance can hold and tolerate. And so as we can increase self-acceptance, our ability for self-awareness also grows. And we can create more space for more self-acceptance by normalizing the human experience, by introducing paradigm shifts to say that you don't actually need somebody like Sally yelling at you to fuel your growth and improvement, right? You've shown that to yourself. You really, for the most part, gotten that under control, and you are still a rock star and you're still growing every day. You're writing a book, right? And so we need to have these shifts for people to create space for self-acceptance to grow, and then they become more self-aware.
Well, I love this. And what it's reminded me, Dr. Laura, is that, the compassion that we give to others, we have to give to ourselves, right? It brings up self-compassion. And self-compassion is, that doesn't come easily all the time. It really doesn't. And I can see, as you're working with the high achievers, which are also my client base, right? Everybody wants to focus on all the things, and they're down on themselves. And what's amazing to me is how incredibly accomplished and smart and even kind, like all the good stuff. And yet they don't see it in the same lens. There's no clarity there when they're starting to go into self-judgment. That's why this work is so important, because until you get into the radical self-acceptance, you really can't get very far at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. It becomes a ceiling. And I think the hard part with our high achieving clients is that they've gotten as far as they have by judging themselves, and they just don't yet know maybe how much further they can go and how much more enjoyable the journey can be. Because there is
moreover, if you're going to be judging yourselves and staying in that mindset as a leader, you're probably judging those that you're leading. And that is just, at the end of the day, that starts to get catastrophic. That's, something that keeps feeding on itself. what is like one small actionable step that someone can take when they're looking to embrace what it is that you're talking about today?
Yes, I'm excited to share this with your listeners. So it's called taking credit. And I'll explain a bit about what this is. I want you to think about it like just starting to do baby push-ups. This is probably building muscle that is new. So it might feel weird. It might feel hard. It might feel super uncomfortable. None of those are good reasons not to do it. You want to practice taking credit, build the muscle up. An example of this, let's say, and this actually was true for me probably 9 or 10 years ago, I decided I was going to become a runner. And I was like, I'm going to go run 3 miles. And I put on my shoes and I went out into the neighborhood. And I had not even quite made it a mile. And I was practically wheezing and my side was cramping up and like my legs were on fire. And I was like, okay, I'm going back. You know, like that's good. I kind of looped around. I'm like, there's my house. Maybe I'm just good for right now. Now, most high achievers are going to look at that and go, oh, I couldn't even make it a mile. I was supposed to go for 3. So, right. Or some version of that.
Yeah.
They're going to focus on the gap and not the gain. Taking credit would sound like, you know what? I am proud of myself for getting out there and running the 0.8 miles that I did run, because that's 0.8 miles more than I ran yesterday. So practicing taking credit, it's focusing on the gain instead of the gap. Because there's always going to be a gap, Danielle, right?
No, I'm right there with you, Dr. Laura. We really, there's a lot of overlap in the way that we think and approach life. So Dr. Laura doesn't know me well. We were introduced by a mutual podcast type of company. And so I'm known as the WTF lady. WTF stands for Women That Flourish on the podcast, right? On the podcast you're on, and you are a woman that flourishes. So within the WTF, I've taken the coaching that I'm doing and everything's about WTF, right? So to your point that you're making right now, what I call this is WTF, which stands for Win Tiny First. And what I drive home consistently is the message that you're saying in a different way, that we need to celebrate, acknowledge, and as we're going towards that goal, whatever that goal may be, the 3-mile run, everything that we do, those small wins that where we're showing up in a different way because we're moving towards something, these things are wins in and of themselves. Absolutely. So you WTF, you win tiny first. Do not overlook that. It is so easy for all of us, myself included, to say, well, that was a failure. I set out to do this and I didn't. Well, just back up the bus, okay? Because yes, you did. First, you were aware of what that goal was going to be. You made shifts and steps to approach that goal, and you're working towards it. This brings up like perfectionism. We fall into this whole thing like, okay, we've got an idea and it's got to be perfect, and like perfect out of the gate. Now, it's so downright ridiculous, right? There's no way. At first, I don't even want to be perfect. Okay, I just enjoy the process.
Let's start with perfect and get better from there.
Yeah, but it's not so great, especially for the clientele that you have and that I actually service, and that we kind of both fall into as well, right? Not to toot our own horn, but to be willing to suck at something before you get good. Because the problem becomes, or the problem was, let's put this as a historical thing, is that we're used to being great at certain things. So all of a sudden, you know what it's like to be proficient, efficient, and just like, excel. And that's your reputation, and that's your identity, and that's your brand. And then you get outside your comfort zone to try something new, and all of a sudden you're back into kindergarten. My 2024 year has been all about that. I mean, the struggle is real as I try to wear so many hats that I never had to when I was in corporate America. But you know what? It's also exhilarating. There can be a really like youthful kind of experience of saying, I have no idea, but you know what? I'm on my way. So whatever that goal is, again, to that message that you had, which is going to be in my refrigerator, I want to say it again. I found myself in this constant pursuit of happiness rather than finding happiness in the pursuit, is what she has on her Instagram as one of the posts. And it all goes back to that, right? It's the actual process. It's the actual journey. It's not just the end goal. And because we just, experience so many unscripted pivots, that goal may never happen. I tell my clients, like, look, have a goal. Goals are good,
Yep.
and but don't have a plan necessarily. I believe in planning and I believe in strategically moving forward. But the plan, well, let me tell you, life is what happens when, we're busy making other plans, right? And when you get fixated on that, and if you think you fall short, it's because it didn't go according to your script. But our life script is so much bigger than what it is we set to do. And I will tell you this wholeheartedly, I believe this, that if I had everything that I wanted in life, if my script looked like that, I would have denied myself the life that I have today.
Yeah.
I have no problems. Even the obstacles, even the heartaches, of which there were many, I would have denied myself. I was thinking so much smaller. So it's about that open-mindedness. It's about congratulating yourself, celebrating the tiny wins, because they count. They are concrete evidence that you are capable of going further.
Absolutely.
Right? But when it comes to running, you said that, and all of a sudden I went, and I'll be honest with you, I went into self-judgment. I went, wah, wah, wah. Because one of the things that I've always wanted to do and have yet to actually execute is to become a runner. Now, at my age, I convinced myself that it's probably not good for me, okay? Because, the hips and this and that, and I want to keep things like working. But I have always, Dr. Laura, always looked at people that ran, like even more than a hobby. I was actually married to a guy who, when we were first dating, he used to run marathons, right? And just the hours and the commitment involved in that. And whenever I see people running, I'm like, oh, look at them. I wish I did that, which is, kind of silly. I don't even have to run 3 miles. I could power walk them. And I do that.
Totally.
But I mean, just show up for yourself in the way that you want to. But when you did say that, I went into little self-judgment. So I'm calling myself out here.
It's so useful to notice that. Thank you for sharing that, Danielle.
Yeah, well, because I live, for the most part, in a heightened state of awareness, right? And sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. There are plenty. You know what I say, Dr. Laura? Every day I look for that aha moment. I really do, because our lives are filled with them. And there was a time that I would have been like, how could you not have seen or noticed this before? And today I just live in a state of gratitude that awareness came to me, right?
Yes.
And when I start cruising along and the days turn into weeks and I didn't get any aha moments, I start saying, uh-oh. If I don't get an aha, I go, uh-oh, that you're not paying attention. Okay?
Yeah.
You are missing something, because we always have the chance to see more, learn more, do more, but not because we're broken or need to be fixed, because those opportunities are before us if we so choose to pursue. But, it's one of those things that is a journey. I love that you have that tattoo on you. When you said you visited, did you say 11 countries in 12 months?
Yes. Yeah.
My tattoo would have said tired. Okay. I would have come back from that
too.
and I would have said tired. We're putting that on my wrist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can we just go back for a moment? Could you tell us what you were doing? Because not many people get that kind of experience. So tell us, what were you doing in 11 countries in 12 months? What was that about?
So I actually really wanted to move to Sydney, Australia. In 2017, I decided I was going to do that. And I ran into visa obstacles, didn't see a way to do it. And somebody suggested that I do this remote year thing instead. And so it's actually a company that I paid as a service.
Okay.
They handle all the flights, all the logistics. They find the accommodations. They find a co-working space in every single city. And they provide you with a local team in every country to help you learn the culture when you first arrive.
Really?
So I was like, what an amazing way to do this, because I personally don't enjoy planning logistics for travel. I thought if I had to do that, I would never go. I would never visit all these places. It's just too much. And so it was cohort-based travel. So we were all working professionals who had the ability to work remotely, but wanted to do it while moving all around the world. And so I was still running my business. I did actually come back to the States a couple times to meet with my clients in person. I was still doing coaching, even if I was in Asia. I'm coaching people at 11 p.m. midnight. Yeah.
How old were you at this time? I mean, give me some sort of time frame.
Yeah, I was 34.
Okay, so you were an adult. This wasn't like,
I was an
post
adult.
college, I'm just going to take
Yeah.
a backpack. I mean, you're full on living the adult life, had the career intact, and you had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
That's
And I actually
amazing.
brought my employee with me. I had an
Okay.
assistant who I had just
Mm-hmm.
hired about 6 months earlier. And I said, do you want to travel the world with me? And I was actually shocked when she said yes. I thought that would be way too big of a change for her. She was
Mm-hmm.
23 or 24 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And she said yes. And so it was an incredible bonding experience too for the both of us to go through that all together.
Well, just your exposure to those different cultures and whatnot
Yes.
has really probably lent itself to the depth of your work, because you're not just talking about, your neighborhood where you're working today or whatever. You have been exposed and lived and
Mm-hmm.
seen how all the different cultures can embrace this type of, work with the radical self-acceptance, right? Because what we
Yeah.
learn a lot of times, Dr. Laura, I think you'll agree, we have to unlearn, right?
Yes.
And
I totally
cultures
agree.
are different. And even if, like, we could all be like, okay, I live in Orange County now, but I'm from Jersey. And, you know, um, even though I wouldn't tell you everybody in my neighborhood learned what I learned, I mean, that's particular to family, how you're raised,
Mm-hmm.
what
Yes.
you're taught, right? And I think that probably one of the most challenging but liberating experiences in my life was, later on as an adult, I recognized that there was more to the world outside than what it was that I taught, or that I was going to believe. And it wasn't that I was going to adopt what everybody said, but I had a more open mind as to, what things could be. And
Yeah.
once I did that, I became a better listener,
Oh,
right? As
so
opposed
valuable.
to a talk. So
Mm-hmm.
valuable, right? Because there's a lot of unlearning to do sometimes. And, just to think better. I think that the generations today, yeah, I have 4 kids. Yeah, they're full-blown adults now, 25, 29, 31, 33, the list goes on. But really, their generations were a whole lot more open-minded
Mm,
about things. And
mm.
I do see the world shifting that way
Shifting.
than,
I agree.
me. I'm class of 1964. So, um, but I'm on board with all of it now. I have caught
Yeah.
up to some degree. I think that radical self-acceptance is something that is a real game changer, when, just living a life that is full more of joy
Yeah.
than judgment.
Yes.
And the whole, that saying, Dr. Laura, comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true. And it took some doing, but the way I live my life now, and I say it a lot on this podcast, is that I'm no longer comparing myself to you, to anybody else. I wake up and I look in the mirror and I'm like, okay, Danielle, this is you. What's the goal? To be a better version of yesterday. That's the only goal. And if I look at you or somebody else and I want what you have, that to me is a source of inspiration, not
Absolutely.
envy.
That's
Right? So
actually a
if,
self-acceptance thing.
yeah,
I think your
it,
ability to do that is you're not
yes,
in self-judgment as you look. You're
yes,
self-accepting and going,
yeah.
oh, wow, look what I
Because there
can
will
also.
always be somebody that's something bigger, okay? Whether it's
Always.
prettier, richer, smarter, more advanced. I mean, come on,
Yep.
that is just going to be. And the thing is that we can all walk into any given room, and the things that maybe would have in the past made me envious, maybe wouldn't make you. We are
Uh-huh.
attracted to the things that are really meant for us. That's how it gets on our radar. So if I see something that I want, okay, to become or to be, I don't mean like, be 5'9", because that would be nice and that's not happening, right? But if somebody has something, I'm like, oh, look at that. That got on your radar. That's a
Yeah.
source of enlightenment and information that maybe you want to move towards that.
Yes, that's
And
useful.
yes, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
useful information. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like, oh, they're just better. Oh, I'll never get there. You know what?
Right.
Everybody started somewhere, which is why I like to have people on this podcast and say, hey, we celebrate your success and where you are today and where you're going. But that journey wasn't overnight. Nobody really is thinking about all the no's that person encountered and the heartache or the hardships or all the kind of denials, right? That are
Absolutely.
along the way. And
Yeah.
so your work is fantastic. Is there something that you want to end this episode with? to, lead our listeners into some more insight on what this entire thing is about? What's your a little piece of advice?
So I would summarize it with a quote from Robert Holden,
Okay.
which says there is no amount of self-improvement that will ever make up for a lack of self-acceptance.
Oh, okay.
And so
That's a good one. All right.
Right. It was very sobering to me when I heard that. And if your listeners are curious for themselves, we actually do have a free self-assessment, a free quiz, if they want to take that and check it out to see kind of where do you fall today between that self-acceptance and self-judgment and then self-improvement, trusting that you can actually be high on both. But where are you today? If you want to learn more about that, then you can just go to selfacceptancequiz.com. Take that and we'll give you a report and give you some ideas about how you can shift your life in ways that are really meaningful.
That's fantastic. I will have all those links in the show notes. So anybody listening, make sure you check out the show notes. And thank you again, Dr. Laura, for coming on and just for coming into my world. Sometimes these things just happen randomly. And then I get so excited that the universe has just gifted me another WTF woman that flourishes, because that's what you are. All right.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Laura.